I purchased the Nikon Z6ii 2 years ago, and since then we've taken 183,000 images across 3 bodies that we purchased. And so the question is would I still buy that same camera today? I'm a wedding photographer based in Toronto, and I have used this camera now for 2 full wedding seasons. And my main camera alone has 130,000 images on it. So one could say that I have taken this camera to the test. I made my first video about this camera about a year ago, and I was very much still in the honeymoon period. I was so excited. I had upgraded from a Nikon D750, and this was my first mirrorless camera that I had purchased. And so, yes, I was very excited, but I feel like now I have a little less maybe emotional attachment to the camera, and I think maybe a little bit more logical and rational. We'll see. So I'm gonna go through what I still like about the camera. I'm gonna show you a lot of my favorite images that I photographed with it over the last 2 years. And then I'm gonna go through what I don't like about it. And then at the very end, I'll give you my conclusion about would I still purchase this camera now that I've had it for 2 years? So let's start with the good stuff. When I made this review, I'm gonna link it in the video so you can check it out if you haven't seen it already. But I focused so much on the low light capabilities, mainly because it was such a huge step up from the D750. I remember shooting on that camera, the D750, and if I was getting near 5,000, it could be scary. That image could be unusable. But with the Z6ii, and I actually forgot about this. I just rewatched the video, and I had forgotten how much of the video I talked about the low light capabilities. And that's just simply because I have gotten so used to what this camera does for me. I don't really think about low light, issues because it works so well in low light, because I can crank the thing up to 10,000 ISO and still get great usable images out of it. So maybe I still am emotionally very positive about this camera because there are so many good things about this camera, and especially so many good things from the upgrade that I had, that over the last year, I've just gotten so used to them. And I don't even think twice about them, that you kind of forget. You forget what you have. Another thing that I do really like about this camera is the size and the weight. In my original review, I said that it kind of felt like a toy camera, and I wasn't too sure about how I felt about that. As a wedding photographer, weight and size makes a huge difference. When you're carrying around things for 12 hours, an inch difference in the size of the camera can really wear on you over the course of a whole wedding season. I carry at least 1, sometimes 2, depending on what my setup for the day is. And I just like the low profileness of this camera. In the previous video, and I've had comments since, people ask me since oh, I'm sure you really want the Z8. And one of the big issues with the Z8, even though it is a beautiful camera and there is so many beautiful new upgraded things to it, of course it is big. It's bigger than the Z6ii, and it's heavier, and that makes a difference to me. I don't need this massive, huge, heavy duty camera to do wedding photography. And that's my next point, is the resolution. I don't need a huge amount of resolution for wedding photography. I would say at the most, my couples are maybe, printing a 16 by 20. But even that is kind of big. They're not really doing that so much anymore. I'm maybe, making some albums for them, but those albums are typically somewhere around 9 by 12. So I don't need a huge amount of resolution. I've also had lots of people ask oh, aren't you getting the GFX? And there are a lot of wedding photographers that are moving to digital medium format, shooting with the GFX. But for me, I don't need that level of resolution. And from my understanding, the lower resolution actually gives you a little bit of better performance in low light. Has to do with the size of pixels or whatever it is. And speaking of things that I no longer even think about or cross my mind is the viewfinder. This was a huge sticking point for me. Before I got this camera, I was just like, there is no way I'm getting a camera where I can't see exactly. I don't want to look at a screen. I don't want to be like in here looking at a screen. I don't want to be holding the camera like this, like a doofus, and like taking photos of looking down at a screen. Now I'm biting my words because I do both of those things. Like I look down at the screen and I look at the viewfinder and it's totally fine. I don't even think about it twice now. The only downside about that, and I guess this is a positive negative point, is the whole battery situation. In terms of usage of amount of batteries, I definitely use more batteries than I did with my D750. But if you get your standby settings right and the review settings of how long your screen stays on and auto shut off and all that, that makes a huge difference. If you have those settings on and where your screen is kind of on all the time, your camera will fly through batteries almost to for a wedding photographer, it's like too much. Like you're gonna fly through batteries faster than you can charge them, or you're gonna have like 10 batteries, which would be ridiculous. Maybe not 10, but maybe 8. You could fly through batteries. I have 6 batteries across 3 cameras, so 2 each, but I usually use around 3 or 4 batteries in a day myself. So even though those screens are great and I really like them, they do use up more battery. And that is something that I do kind of think about and worry about at times where I'm like, I better make sure I have a backup battery if I'm going into a ceremony or something where I could get stuck with a dead battery. The 5th thing, I think this is number 5, is the focus. Oh my goodness. From the SLR days to mirrorless, like Nikon, thank you so much. That was a massive change for me. I went from just like regularly missing focus and having difficulty doing that, especially low light, especially movement. It was a little wild sometimes, to having a much better success rate at focusing. I will say there are times when the focus decides like, I just don't want to do anything anymore. And it's actually very confusing. And you kind of can get stuck and be like, this camera has just decided it wants to not be a camera anymore. That happens rarely, but maybe once every few weddings or something. Thankfully, it's never happened in a critical scenario. It's more in kind of a low light scenario when actually something that does reoccur is when it's people or faces, but it's a little bit further away. It has a hard time kind of figuring it out that it's people over there that I want to focus on. That might be my focus mode. I don't change it much. I kind of keep it on the smaller box size face detect kind of all the time. And so that could be my own problem. Another problem is, I know, I have not updated the firmware at all on this camera. And just before doing this video, I just realized that one of those firmware updates is an update for the focus. So I might be just like completely going in the comments being like, forget what I said about focusing. But I would say if you're coming from an SLR, you're going to be amazed at the level of this focusing. But if you're looking at I think Sony has really wonderful focusing. Good for them. But I would say I'm still really happy. I would say 80% of the time, maybe 85% of the time, you're just gonna like nail that focus and get it exactly where you'd want it to be. The next thing is the shadows. I think Nikon is great with this. It is great in the shadow and in the generally underexposed photo world. The highlights are not very forgiving. So once you start blowing at those highlights, they are gone. But if you have dark photos, you can bring the crap out of that thing. Like you can bring it way up and it's quite amazing. The next thing is video. And I have been using this camera for video more and more and more. And that is primarily because of this YouTube channel. All of my videos, for the most part, are either photographed on this Nikon, well, actually the one that you're looking at through right now, but this camera or my iPhone. And so I think it's done a really great job. The only thing that I kind of like wish is that there's no way to pull the screen around to be able to see it. So I have a video monitor to be able to see what the camera sees. I'm guessing that's maybe just on like the lower end kind of vlogger cameras that you can flip it out. But I would have loved the ability to do that just for the video's sake. Speaking of the LCD screen, that will transition to us into the negatives, the things that I do not like about this camera. I do not love the tilting configuration of the LCD screen. That is one thing that I do love about the GFX, and that is that they have a vertical tilt. So for the Z6ii, you can only kind of tilt it out and up when you're holding the camera at a horizontal, when you're holding it horizontally. I would love if you could hold the camera vertically and be able to tilt the screen out. I don't know if that's ever gonna happen. The other thing that I wish, and that is that I wish it looked cooler. Ever since the ZF has come out, that kind of more retro looking version of this camera, it makes me so like, that's the only thing that is tempting me to a different camera in the Nikon line, is that kind of like retro film look of the ZF. Totally love that. And I don't remember, well, I should have looked that up, but the other version of it, there's two kind of retro looking ones. And from my understanding, one of those cameras is almost identical to the Z6ii in terms of the insides, the guts. It pretty much is just a different looking camera. But I do wish it looked like those, but that's okay. In my first video, I talked about how I kind of hated the ISO and the record button, but after another year of using it, I have gotten used to pretty much all of the buttons on the camera. The one button that is really annoying is the display switching button. And that is up on the side of the viewfinder, is that I just hit that thing all the time. And it's constantly, turning off my LCD or turning off my viewfinder. And then the last bad thing about this camera is that it is not the Z6ii, which at this point of this video has not come out yet. There's only rumors right now of it coming out. But my point is, of course, there's going to be a newer camera. Of course, there's going to be different cameras, different brands with slightly different advantages and disadvantages and whatever. And that's okay. And so part of my conclusions about whether I would buy this camera today is that, does this camera actually fit what I need? Does it fit what I'm looking for? Is it going to solve all my problems, or is there another camera that is going to solve more problems than this camera? And my conclusion is that this camera does exactly what I need it to do. Are there other options out there that would work great for what I'm doing? Sure. When I had my 750, I was aware of the shortcomings. There were certain things like focus, like ISO, that I was just like, oh man, this kind of is a problem. And it is really holding me back from taking great images at weddings. And what I love about the upgrade to the Z6ii for me was that it took so many of those shortcomings away. I don't feel like I am getting shortchanged by using the Z6ii, even though it is getting to be several years old as a camera. Even if the 3 version does come out, there would have to be some type of significant change for me to consider upgrading. And so I have had a lot of comments like, oh, would you still buy this camera? Should I buy this camera even though it's so old? It's not that old at all. I would say definitely. And I think even as the 3 comes out, it's a great time to pick up one of these cameras, because they'll be cheaper, they'll be on sale. And I think anyone that is an event photographer, anyone that's a wedding photographer, I think is going to be very happy with a camera like the Nikon Z6ii. And the last thing that I will say about this camera is that ultimately, my clients do not care what camera I have. They don't care if I have whatever brand, they care about great images. And if I can make great images with this camera and I'm really happy with it and my clients are really happy with it, then I'm going to be happy with it. And so at the end of the day, if you can make it good with the camera that you have or the camera that you want to get, then that is the perfect camera for you.